SSH dynamic port forwarding is a way of opening a SOCKS 4 or 5 proxy server on your local computer and forwarding all the data to an SSH server you are running someplace else on the internet. Why would you want to do this, you might ask? Sometimes you're on an untrusted network, but have to use protocols that aren't completely secure, let's say HTTP or FTP or SMTP, and you don't want someone else on the local LAN sniffing what you are doing. By using SSH dynamic port forwarding, you can create an encrypted tunnel to a trusted network so others have a harder time sniffing passwords and other data as you send it across the network. This is a great thing to do if you're on an untrusted network, such as at a coffee house or at a hacker convention, where everybody and their brother is running a sniffer of some sort. Think of it as sort of a poor man's VPN. Click Next to continue this tutorial. I came up with this illustration to try to explain how SSH tunneling works. In the top diagram, you see how normal traffic might go across the network if you're not using SSH tunneling. You communicate with each individual box on the internet you want to talk to. However, anybody else on your LAN segment, let's say it's a wireless LAN or a local area network all running over Ethernet, can sniff your connection and your communication, thus revealing passwords, data and pictures that you're getting off the web, and other things. If you look at the illustration at the bottom of this panel, you'll see how an SSH tunnel might work. All the lines in green are encrypted and all the lines in red are unencrypted. In the case of using dynamic port forwarding with SSH, what you're doing is you're setting up a local proxy server on your host. Let's say it's a laptop you're using at a coffee shop that's local to you. You're then connecting to that proxy server that's running locally. It's encrypting all the data and sending it to some box you can SSH to out on the internet. In my case, generally a Linux box running OpenSSH. From there, the traffic is sent unencrypted to whatever servers on the internet you're trying to communicate with. Now granted, at some point in time, the channel is going to be unencrypted. However, by doing it off the local area network and doing it on a trusted network, you make it harder for people to be able to sniff your connection. Because you probably should worry more about local people at the coffee shop sniffing your connection than people running the routers at the various ISPs that your communications have to cross from your trusted network to the actual service you're trying to get to. Now granted, using SSH tunneling does cause some extra overheads and slowdowns, but for web traffic, for the most part, as long as all the connections between your trusted LAN and the machines you're trying to connect to are fairly fast, you probably won't notice as much, and it's going to be much more secure. Another thing you want to make sure before you start using SSH tunneling is that you have the keys that you exchange with your SSH server pre-cached on whatever machine you're using to connect. If you have them pre-cached and you try to connect, you shouldn't get any warning messages. However, if you try to connect one that already has a pre-cached key, you should get a warning message about this is a brand new key or the key has changed. In this particular case, someone may be using another tool that does a man-in-the-middle attack, proxies the SSH connection, and then tries to sniff your data. In those cases, just choose not to connect. That's probably the safest option. Click Next to continue this tutorial. To set up dynamic port forwarding in Linux using SSH, drop out to a command prompt and type in SSH space -D and the port number you want it to listen to. This can be any old port number. I'm just choosing 1080. Then type in the username you want to log into your remote secure shell box with, an @ symbol, and the IP address or the host name of your secure shell box. Once you've done that, hit enter into your password, and now we can go to Firefox to set up our connection. Once we're in Firefox, we're going to go to Edit, then Preferences. Then underneath General, click the Connection Settings button. I already have SOCKS set up in this box, but what I normally do would be click on Manual Proxy Configuration, tell it the SOCKS host is my local host, and the port number is 1080 or whatever I set in the previous SSH step. Now at this point I can hit Close, and I should be able to web surf pretty much any place I want to. If I clicked on a web page that revealed my IP address, it should say the IP address of my SSH server as opposed to the true IP address of the machine I'm on currently. That's because all the traffic is being routed through the SSH box. I can do the same thing in Windows by using the PuTTY client. First I type in the hostname or IP address of my SSH server, then I go in to configure my tunnels. In this section I can choose the port I want to dynamically forward. In this case I'm just going to choose 1080, but it could just as easily have been a different port as long as it's not already used by a different service in Windows. So I don't have to make these settings every time. I'll go ahead and save this session underneath a name that's easy to remember. Henceforth, I can just click on the session name to make the connection. Once the session to the SSH server is started, it should prompt me for my username and password. Enter those, and then dynamic port forwarding should be possible. After all that's done, I should be able to set up my SOCKS connection pretty much the same way as I did underneath Linux, except for the Options menu may be underneath Tools instead of Preferences. Click Next when you're finished with this section of the video. Now that you understand the basics of setting up an SSH tunnel in Linux and Windows using OpenSSH or PuTTY and Firefox, here's a few links you might want to check out for further research. First of all, the OpenSSH webpage, where you can download the newest version of OpenSSH, assuming it didn't already come with your distribution of Linux. The PuTTY website, where you can download the open source SSH client PuTTY for Windows. You may also do well to learn more about SSH and SOCKS by going to their respective Wikipedia entries. As you notice from the tutorial, I only showed how to use SOCKS from Firefox, and not all clients have SOCKS support built in. If you check out the SOCKS entry at Wikipedia, you should be able to find several free clients you can use for sending pretty much any kind of internet traffic to a SOCKS proxy. Special thanks go out to my cohorts, Chris and Corey, for giving me the idea to do this tutorial, Droops and Informaticon.org crew, Nick at RootSecure.net for the news, and all the folks at AntiOnline and BenRev.com.